Okay, everybody. As we have people coming in, we are usually starting with our keynotes in a leisurely fashion, but we have our award ceremony coming up. It's been a long day, and I want to give Noëlle as much time, the benefit of time, to explain and enlighten us on a really, really important topic. But before I give her the floor, I just want to tell you why I thought it would be really important for Noëlle to be here to talk to us. One of the things that we do, we try to do well at ISPP, is push our understanding. In the previous session here today, we were talking about Bob Jervis and how Bob, oscillating between a position of international relations and political psychology, was able to broaden and push the horizons of our understanding of international relations challenges, the psychological mechanisms of these challenges, to inform our science in a better way. Very few of us are as gifted as Bob to be able to do this with our own work, within our own, argue against ourselves within our own writings. What we try to do instead is engage with others that can be that counterpoint, that can be that other point of view, not necessarily contradictory to ours, but starting from a different point, a different beginning. So we can see the synergies, and we can see the tensions, we can recognize them and learn from them rather than avoid them. A few months ago, I came across a book that I read with great interest, and it was Noëlle's book. And it was based on an idea of Winnicott. It was called The Fear of Breakdown. I strongly recommend it. To me, the attraction was Winnicott per se, the core of the book that was so similar to the theme of the conference. And then I read about her work, and I looked her up a little, as we do these days on Google, and I thought, would Noëlle, has she been at ISPP before? We checked, no. Would she fit with us here in ISPP? And by thinking that, I thought, what is us? How homogeneous are we? And I realized we're not. We have different voices, different approaches. We challenge each other. And one of the best ways for us to become even better is to allow ourselves to challenge us one more time. So I wanted to introduce Noëlle McAfee to you. She is professor of philosophy and psychiatry and behavioral science. She does 3 things that many of us do just once. And give her the floor so she can tell you all about her work. Thank you, Noëlle, for being here with us. And welcome.
Is this on? Is this on? Yes, it is on. Thank you so much, Teresa. Thank you so much. And thank you all for coming. I know it's been an intense 3 days because I've been in and out of meetings. I've learned so much. As you can see, I'm primarily a philosopher. A long, long time ago, in a land far away, I did some survey research methodologies, so I kind of can follow what I'm learning from you all. So that is helpful. I am a philosopher, but I also have gone through training in psychoanalysis. I'm not a psychoanalyst. My material comes from politics. And as you know, there's plenty of material to work on in politics. A lot of what I'm talking about today is familiar to you all, and I've learned a lot already from you. So I'm going to move through. My hope is that there will be a good 15, 20 minutes before the award ceremony starts. I will say we'll start that this time after the next hour. So I want to be able to get your feedback and thoughts, and I look forward to lively discussion. So for several decades, I've been exploring the roots of dysfunctional politics and impediments to democracy using both democratic and psychoanalytic theories. I've addressed these questions in broad terms, but over the past several years, I've wanted to drill deeper to understand this. Can we pinpoint what makes some people gravitate to extremist movements, namely identitarian groups like white supremacy, nationalism, fascism? To put it bluntly, and I've never actually put it this bluntly in public or in writing, what is wrong with them? Did something go wrong in their childhood? Or are they just like everyone else, susceptible to becoming triggered into gravitating toward these groups. So my psychoanalytic work has led me to a hypothesis that I want to explore with you today. And that is this, that individuals who gravitate to extremist identitarian movements may be stuck in or regress to a pre-edible stage of development where they resort to archaic and primordial defenses, the same defenses that are hallmarks of identitarian politics. These include right-wing ethnic and nationalist populisms, which I'll focus on today. This inquiry, I believe, will not only help us understand individual psychology better, but also understand the nature of these movements. So, studying populism. For over the past few decades, populism has been on the rise throughout the world, and you all know this, from Hugo Chávez's socialist populism in Venezuela to Viktor Orban's nationalist populism in Hungary. And more leaders are deriving their legitimacy from popular support, even as they engage in authoritarian politics. And this presents a problem for the theme of this conference, for example, thinking of democracy as an achievement, when sometimes that democracy is hard to discern it from certain kinds of populisms. Also known as competitive authoritarianism, this phenomenon has led to a vast scholarly literature attempting to define and make sense of it. Most theorists see these appeals to the people as troubling, largely because of their primary feature, a tendency to split the field between the good people, personified in the form of the leader, and its enemies. This gives the leader carte blanche to carry out authoritarian politics, to play favorites in the form of clientelism, and to consolidate power by whittling away at horizontal branches of governance. Many theorists worry that the problem is the people and their tendency to fall for demagogues, that giving free rein to movements for popular sovereignty, that is democracy, can lead to illiberal politics. So we are warned, beware of the people and any movements that act in their name, including left-leaning ones like the ones that led in the previous decade were led by Bernie Sanders in the United States, Syriza in Greece, or Podemos in Spain. So you all know this approach, the thin ideology approach. Another theme in the literature is that populism's primary feature, its tendency to split the field between the good and the bad people, is its overriding ideology. It is not that some populisms put themselves forward as socialist and others are right-wing. These thick ideological stances are really mere hosts for the dominant, though thin, ideology. The thin ideology that leaders as different as India's Narendra Modi and Greece's Alex Tsipras share supposedly is a thin ideological notion that the world can be split between the good and the bad people, with leaders acting as part pro toto of the people. This theoretical point of view effectively dismisses any real difference between left and right-wing populisms. I disagree. For there are certainly major differences between how the two kinds play out, not just the content of them. Left-wing populisms tend to be forward-looking and more willing to tolerate plurality, difference, and dissent, even if they too can become corrupt and anti-democratic. In contrast, right-wing populisms tend to be backward-looking, hearkening to a golden age, and wary to the point of paranoid about the future's prospects. Many, though not all, right-wing populisms trade in conspiracy thinking and apocalyptic visions, along with fantasies of being able to retrieve their lost golden era, as in Trump's slogan, "Make America Great Again," or Erdogan's call to resurrect the glory of the Ottoman Empire. Left-wing populisms generally do not do these things. These differences between left and right-wing populisms, I will argue here, are not to be found in the content of their ideologies. It's not like that, oh, I like the lefty ones better, I want them to be good. Rather, they are found in the psychological phenomena that lead some people to gravitate to one kind and not the other. That, in short, give rise in some places to what we might call, borrowing from Melanie Klein, a paranoid schizoid politics. Paranoid schizoid is what Klein calls the tendency of small children to divide the world into angels and demons, saviors and destroyers, forces of light and forces of darkness. Out of persecutory anxiety, the child may dream of murdering and destroying the fantasized demons. But if all goes well, it will start to realize that others are neither angels nor demons, but whole, complex, and flawed people. This latter process is what she calls the depressive position, and it's a good thing. The child who has difficulty maturing and accepting going through the depressive position, who has a difficult time accepting others as whole objects, may return to the paranoid schizoid position throughout life, as adults, collectively and individually. I mean, we all do, under duress. You know, you start to hate your enemies, or they're going to kill you, you're going to destroy them, all that. Then you grow up a little bit, okay, right? Calm down, breathe. The most troubling, mostly right-wing populisms exhibit this kind of paranoid structure, invoking the people but severely narrowing who counts as the true people or opportunities for popular power in the public sphere. Mired in a paranoid schizoid politics, they oppose pluralism in civil society, and they hearken back to a supposed past golden era and imagine enemies preventing them from resurrecting their greatness. In other words, they engage in a chronopolitics of a past golden era coupled with a conspiratorial narrative. That's the structure, that's their deep structure. To return to the question of why some people gravitate to these groups, I will do the following today. First, I will give an account of how large group identities are formed, namely through internalizing an ego ideal. Second, I will describe the phenomenon of regression and the defenses that these give rise to politically. And along the way, I will give some examples of defenses that operate in some of the most troubling forms of populism. And finally, I will give a brief account of a path forward that lines up with what Teresa was talking about yesterday, also what Paul will be talking about tomorrow morning. So, first let us consider how large group identities are formed. We are all born into a world where there are already existing group formations, but I do not take these groups to be ontologically primary. What comes first, at least logically, is individual development, namely how children come to internalize objects, that is, the people they encounter, and ideals. It is through a process of a gradual and growing accretion of identifications, as one's inner world gets increasingly populated, that children and adults develop and come to find that they share with others kindred identifications. Groups form out of these shared identifications. Groups are epiphenomenon of individual social development. I lean on psychoanalytic object relations theory to make this claim, so let me briefly offer an overview. Earlier Freudian thought focused on how frustrated desires led to repression and symptoms. Even the seduction theory evident in the 1888 Essays on Hysteria, basically a theory of sexual molestation, had at its roots not the trauma of unwelcome advances, but the trauma of having repressed sexual desire aroused. This theory generally treated the person as riven with desires that could not be satisfied, and symptoms were instinctual representatives of an unconscious desire. So the first Freudian theory was, I have these affects that need to be discharged onto something, so it's primarily about that individual. The picture changed dramatically as Freud embarked upon his metapsychological papers of the 19-teens, as he began to understand the developmental role of internalization, any kind of taking into the self some other object, that is, a person. He first encountered this in his Mourning and Melancholia essay, where he realized that the melancholic had internalized the lost object, letting it live on rather than grieving and relinquishing it. This occurs when the person feels ambivalent about the object, vacillating between hot and cold, love and hate, can't let that object go, and explains why melancholics seem to have such a diminished self-regard. Freud surmised that melancholia was not a loathing of the self per se, but a loathing of something else, namely an internalized lost object. This internalized other for which one feels such ambivalent and often negative emotions makes it seem that the melancholic hates himself, even to the point of wanting to commit suicide, but really it's the shadow of the object that casts the gloom. Freud returned to this phenomena of internalization in his essay on the ego and the id, but here to note something positive. In the course of one's life, one can identify with aspects of people one once knew and admired, taking in aspects of their persona. The teacher one once knew, the lover one once had, the childhood long-lost friend. Each may have had hobbies or manners that one has taken into oneself, becoming part of who we are. In this way, by internalizing aspects of abandoned objects, one builds up one's own character. The major change in Freud's move from the early theory to the later one is this. Where the early theory was about whether or not one's own desires can be achieved, the later theory was about the importance of how our internal worlds are constituted through taking in other objects, that is people. Our inner worlds become populated, for better or worse, through our object relations. Identity is not monadic. It is not about being oneself as opposed to someone else. It's always relational. I am who I am because I've internalized my relations with others. This insight, though not fully articulated until after Freud, paved the way to the second typology. And this is famous, one of his. You can see the first typology underneath. There's the conscious, preconscious, unconscious, and then overlaid on it is the superego, ego, id. Of the three agencies, the superego is quintessentially relational. It is the internalization of the parental and societal norms and taboos. It is also the heir of the Oedipus complex. It's because, we go along with, okay, I can't have mama, I gotta let that go, that we develop a superego. Only by giving into the father's/societal demand that the child move from the dyad of mother-child to the social world and its norms and taboos, only in this way does one internalize the social norms. The superego is already a shadowy presence back in the interpretation of dreams. As the censor, it shows up later as the internalized aspiration to be like someone else, someone who serves as an ego ideal or ideal ego. I want to be like that. And I internalize that as something against which I measure my actual self. But in its fullness, it shows up as, I can't be like that. I must give in to civilization and all its discontents. In this group psychology essay, he develops this further with this notion that one way that groups form is by taking a leader to be an ego ideal, someone that aspired to be like. In Freud's view here, when others around them do the same, then there are many with the same ego ideal, right? So you like the Fuhrer, I like the Fuhrer, and we have that shared ego ideal that binds them together. And otherwise, groupness is an epiphenomenon of internalizing the leader as the ideal ego. The leader can be an object of both aspiration and security. So in other words, what appears to be the external reality of a social group is the result of its members' internal worlds. Now, for Freud, the primal father or leader of the primal father or leader of the primal horde as an ego ideal is what the members of the groups internalize. But since Freud, things have been changed differently. There's a wonderful book by Janine Chasgay-Smirgal, that's a mouthful, who wrote this book called The Ego Ideal. And in the book, she actually teases apart what's going on in this text of Freud's, that it's not just that what the group is actually an ego ideal which is distinct from a superego. So so what I'll be saying here, just to make it super clear, the ego ideal is the more pre-Oedipal, I want to go back to that pre-Oedipal early stage of fusion with the mother. And the superego would be, is the one that's the heir of the Oedipal complex, is telling you what not to do, how to behave, stand up straight, be a nice person. But the other one is pre-Oedipal, and it goes back to what I don't want to have to give up all that. I want to go back to a state of fusion. For her, she says a group will be kind of experienced like a dream, as a hallucinatory wish fulfillment. And this is a quote from her. In the group, as in the dream, the psychic apparatus undergoes a triple regression. Temporarily, the group has a tendency to regress to primary narcissism. Topographically, the ego and the superego can no longer exercise their control. The id takes possession of the psychic apparatus with the ego ideal, which seeks to realize a fusion with the omnipotent mother and the introjective restoration of the lost primary love object. The group becomes for the members the substitute for this lost object. So growing up, separating from the dyad, in a lot of Freudian theory, Lacanian theory, there's a kind of longing for what is lost that's always there. We can call it the lost thing because there might not be a word for it. But it's something that is always very seductive. It has its pull. So under the spell of a group, for her, she's rejecting Freud's claim that what operates in the group is a superego, and she says, no, what's really operating in the group is this ego ideal. This earlier stage of development that is pre-Oedipal, that is, it precedes the child's giving into the demands of society, the father, against incest. It recurs to the time when the child could carry out its fantasies of omnipotence and its full focus on pleasure. This early stage was experienced and later hazily recalled after the cut, as Lacan puts it, and the loss of the thing mother, as a time of plenum, plenitude, oneness with everything. His Majesty the baby could have or magically believe that it had everything and wanted for nothing. Winnicott talks about this early infantile stage of omnipotence, because all the people around you are taking care, wiping your butt, giving you food, tending to every need before you even know you have a need. You have a sense of omnipotence. I can make anything happen. This is awesome. You need this. This is a super important part of development. But wanting to kind of go back to it is not a good thing. So as I said, Schatzky-Smergel teases apart Freud's notions of the ego ideal and the superego. The ego ideal harkens back to that pre-Oedipal fusion with the mother, whereas the superego promotes separation and obedience. Schatzky-Smergel argues that the group often functions as an ego ideal, a substitute for that early relation with the mother. Where the superego promotes reality, this ego ideal promotes illusion and attempts to recover infantile omnipotence. So, I'm listening to you all in these sessions the past few days, you have all this data about how this operates, how groups that are drawn to, people that are drawn to right-wing authoritarianism simplify, they have an ideal of the group as very unified, they can't tolerate plurality and difference. So contrary to Freud's view that groups are formed when people identify their own ego ideals with the leader, in this view, the father figure is in fact chased away, she writes, excluded from the group, as is the superego. It is as if the group formation represented of itself the hallucinatory realization of the wish to take possession of the mother by the subship through a very regressive mode, that of primary fusion. This is great. Because you'll see in this quotation of Schatzky-Smergel, what a lot of leaders do, all right? The leader is the person who activates the primitive wish for the union of ego and ideal. He is the promoter of illusion, he who makes it shimmer before men's dazzled eyes, who will bring it to fusion. Times will be changed. The great day will arrive. A heavenly Jerusalem will offer itself to our astonished gaze. Our needs will be met. The Aryans will conquer the world. The day will dawn. The group thirsts for a leader, less for a leader than for an illusion. So the really this is Trump. We could list the others who are promising this illusion that the group will take care of you. Instead of being under the thumb of an austere superego-like ruler, in groups, people are under the sway of illusions, hallucinatory wish fulfillments for a lost thing. This group, whether a nation or a religion or a creed, becomes an avatar of the lost thing. Now, of course, those of you who know beyond, not all groups are like this, but the kind of groups that are worrisome, the politically worrisome ones, I'm putting forward that perhaps they are troubling in this particular way. So part 2, and I will be moving along rather fast. Regression and its defenses. Schatzky-Smergel is describing a pre-Oedipal phenomenon where the subject has not yet or will not give in to the taboos of the superego. I should say, in primary narcissism, that infantile state that the child gives up as it moves out of the dyad, and and into the connecting with the world, right? All's fine. But then kind of regressing would be called secondary narcissism because, it's secondary, it happens later, and you've regressed. So she's describing this pre-Oedipal phenomenon where the subject refuses castration, by which I mean the sad situation in which I realize that I am not omnipotent and cannot and do not have everything. This is a sad situation Freud lays out in Civilization and its Discontents. No more bacchanalia, no more untrammeled libidinal pleasure. The pleasure principle takes a backseat to the reality principle, making a recognizably human society possible. It is sad, but it has given us all this: culture, art, human fellowship, science. But under the illusion of a possible fusion with the lost thing, I need not give that up. I can return to the omnipotence of my infancy. I can regress to that more comfortable place, but I will also likely be the paranoid schizoid infant imagining enemies at the gate, caught up in those archaic anxieties of possible imminent destruction, and with those anxieties mounting primitive defenses such as splitting, denial, and projection. Primitive because there's all these racist connotations of that word. But, think about the imagining enemies at the gate. When Donald Trump was all worked up because there were some immigrants coming up from Mexico. It was the caravan of Mexicans. We're going to get the army out there. Because they're going to destroy us. I mean, he believed this. They were going to destroy us. So before I go into these particular defenses, I want to add one that Shusky Smergel discusses, though she doesn't call it a defense when she talks about ideology. For her, an ideology is a system of thought that promises fulfillment of an illusion, especially such that the people need not engage in any serious process of maturation or look behind their wishful fantasies to things like science and facts. I wish I could find the quote, but what people are saying. Policymakers saying, well, I know there might be studies, there might be science, but I'm going with my gut. Right? To return to the archaic defenses I just mentioned, splitting, denial, and projection, let's return there, okay. These are all processes of disavowal, of avoiding reality, of avoiding making any compromises, of acknowledging any grievance or any losses. That the lost thing is lost is utterly denied. It must still be there. At the same time, belief in the illusion that it can be retrieved is demanded. It must live on. It must be retrievable. Otherwise, reality is unbearable. You can thank me later for avoiding putting up a slide of Lacan's fundamental fantasy, right? Okay. So, it's a fundamental fantasy that we should be able to get our enjoyment, and we must. Though, damn it, we have not yet gotten it, but we must be able to, though it's lost, though people are trying to destroy it from us, but we must be able to get it. In the title of this talk, I parenthetically add that the problem with populism is not the people. By this, I mean that actual people in actual democracies are not the problem. Actual people are a heterogeneous and complex lot. They disagree. They see things from contrary perspectives. They have different histories and different aims. They can behave really poorly. They make politics, the project of deciding collective things in the midst of uncertainty and disagreement, extremely difficult. Just think about the smallest unit of politics, the academic department meeting. We've seen these go badly. When one goes well, a heterogeneous and cantankerous group might be able to find, amongst their disagreements, a way to move ahead and to benefit the variety of aims among the faculty, the staff, and the students. There is no pretense that we all agree, or even necessarily that we like each other. But under duress, group identities can regress and succumb to archaic fantasies, such as splitting and defenses, such as splitting and denial. The person/group identity that has regressed to a paranoid schizoid politics cannot tolerate such messy complexity. It splits. It divides the world into forces of goodness and danger, a hallmark of populisms that all schools of thought agree upon. In contrast to the reality of a complex and complicated people, like a department faculty, the trouble with populism is when it postulates a true people in the singular. Consider one of Trump's offhand remarks when he was first running for president. The only important thing is the unification of the people because the other people don't matter. There are many examples. Okay, so last week in the New York Times, there was a story about this new movement, kind of new Christian nationalism. These are groups that, you can see it all over the place, who want to equate Christian identity and the nation of the United States. And they want to say this separation of church and state is just a myth, that if you want to really be an American, the true Americans are the ones who are Christians, and the ones who aren't Christians aren't really Americans. So these are one and the same thing. To be an advocate for American values is to be Christian, and anyone not Christian cannot be an advocate for America. From there, it is not a far step to the other side of splitting. Either you were with us or you are against us. If you are not on the bus, you are off the bus. If you are not like me, you are my enemy. Not only must you be like me, you must see the world as I do. So I'm just going through these examples of what the psychoanalysts describe happening when people regress to paranoid schizopolitics. We can see all these examples, and you have hundreds more in this room right here of examples of people doing this kind of splitting. This is all the more important when what the group is seeing and believing is an illusion. The more illusory the view, the greater the demand that all agree, and the greater the danger presented by those who do not. Clearly tied to splitting is the defense of projection. The other becomes the reservoir for thoughts and anxieties that are too unbearable to tolerate. So these feelings are split off and projected onto the other. We aren't dangerous, they are. We aren't weak, they are destroying us. We love America and freedom and goodness, they hate it. This projection contributes to polarization, to only seeing the world in the worst in the other, who is seen as evil and unredeemable, whereas our own side is unassailable and good. All over our politics today, there is this kind of demonizing and idealizing. You know, I want to say that while the thin ideological approach will say that all the groups do that, they all do it, but they don't do it the same way, right? They will postulate an enemy for the sake of having a unified people, but it's not like this. It's not this delusional, right? Syriza, the Greek said, you know, the European troika is going to destroy our economy. This is not the same as this kind of splitting, right? There's a qualitative difference. So projection. The projection involves making the other a reservoir of the split off bad part of oneself, a reservoir that then becomes a shared target for destruction. As Vomik Volkan observes, quote, in crisis situations, large groups make regressive movements with a growing need to differentiate themselves, non-sameness, from enemy groups, at the same time reinforcing psychological barriers with them. This differentiation involves selecting suitable targets of externalization as permanent repositories of positive and negative images of the self and of the targets of externalization. So to find an example of the defensive denial, let's take a virtual trip to the Bosnian Valley of the Pyramids, below which some ethnic Serbs believe lie healing waters. As the New York Times reported recently also, around 136,000 people visited this place last year, many seeking to boost their immune systems that treat illnesses and protect themselves from the coronavirus. One of the most famous advocates is the tennis star Novak Djokovic, who said of these waters, you feel that energy go through your body and it is very hard to express in words. You are like in your mother's womb, you are protected. Many Bosnian Muslims, as well as Bosnian Serbs, regard the site as a symbol of national transcendence and proof that they are the descendants of a great civilization. All perhaps harmless fantasies. But for the Bosnian Serbs, this fantasy is coupled with another one, that during the wars of the 1990s, they were misunderstood heroes who sought to save the Serbian people, that foreign powers are trying to make the Serbs feel ashamed. These kinds of, as the New York Times reported, these kinds of emotional rewritings of history fill the playbooks of populist leaders throughout Europe. So it's just another example. So the key features here are a narrative of victimhood and grievance, political attempts to maintain popular support through appeals to Serbian identity, and a strategy of denialism, all part and parcel of a paranoid schizoid politics. And finally, a major feature of projection is paranoia and an unconscious form of disavowal. So we see in all the conspiracy theories, right, that seem to be so active, this is a kind of disavowal of this paranoia that someone is trying to destroy me. They are, as Lacanians put it, trying to rob me of my enjoyment. We saw it in Trump's cries that they were trying to steal the election, when in fact he was trying to steal the election. That those people in the urban areas were out to steal it. The political leaders egging on the Stop the Steal conspiracy were the very ones trying to suppress the vote. Again, the pattern, I'm not bad, you're bad. So all these are ways of trying to get rid of intolerable affects and phenomena. So, part 3. Again, I'm going to move really quickly now, because I want to have time for talking. From symptom to sublimation. I could and probably will fill a book with further examples, but for now I think you get my point. Ethnic and other identitarian political movements exhibit features of a regressed state, a paranoid schizoid use of splitting, projection, and denial. I have suggested that these movements accrue because of the psychological state of their members who found these groups appealing in the first place, specifically those who needed a group ideal that reinstates illusion and promises a fusion with the lost thing. Rather than submit to the socio-symbolic order instituted by the resolution of the Oedipus complex, they regress to an earlier pre-Oedipal state. Not only is the superego, one of the things I told you, I skipped, it was so great. So when Saskia Smirgal is talking about the ego ideal and the superego, she points out that Freud noted that a whole lot of people never really get to that superego, right? They pretend, but they don't really, if they can get away with cheating, they're going to get away with cheating. And whatever superego they have, one of Freud's colleagues, Abraham, said, the superego is dissolvable in alcohol. The superego is also dissolvable under the sway of the group, the group that promises fulfillment. So that could be the essence of that group ideal. Now, I am the first to admit, because I can say it first before y'all point it out to me, right? I'm the first to admit that I have made quite a leap here. I have a theory of group formation, some evidence of the infantile behavior of these groups, and then I am imputing to their members a particular psychological malady. Now, further study is certainly needed to ascertain whether indeed these individuals have such a psychology. But I was at a session 2 days ago, and somebody had that proof. Okay, she's not here because she was zooming in. Annika Lindholm, her group, doing a study on life dissatisfaction and attraction to right-wing authoritarianism. There's a correlation, right? People who are unhappy gravitate there. But anyway, further studies need to kind of back up my theory here. But if my theory bears out under empirical testing, what then? Are the only choices between illusion and castration, that is, between an ego ideal and a harsh superego, between renouncing socio-symbolic constraints and giving into them entirely? Does civilization necessarily come with so many discontents? Are our only choices between hedonic denial of reality, the first path, or neurotic repression and the symptoms that come with it, the second path? I think there's a third path, sublimation, which involves recognizing rather than renouncing desire, and then transforming it creatively and productively using what Lacan calls the symptome. I'll come to that in a moment. So this is the path that Teresa was talking about. This is the path we'll hear from Paul. And I know that Nicholas, too, is on board with this plan. So a path forward in learning how to be democratic, learning how to live with, maybe even take pleasure in plurality and disagreement, and the uncertainty that comes with the political project of deciding something new when we have no foundation, what Arendt calls politics without banisters. That's what democracy is, right? It's scary as F, blank, blank, right? It's scary. But what kind of human beings are capable of taking that on? What do we need to do? I'm just going to mention a few things. There are a lot more things. Engaging with people who are different from us, talking, appreciating plurality and complexity. So, repression which leads to symptoms involves denying the desire itself. The symptom, as Mari Rudy puts it, is thus a stopgap measure intended to ensure our survival. Sublimation, in contrast, reaches beyond survival to something more life-affirming. And these are still her words. Even when sublimation replicates the past, it animates the future as a site of imaginative possibility. Sublimation allows for the desire to be, now this is me. Sublimation allows for the desire to be expressed and fulfilled without repression of that desire, but with a different object. Satisfying drives can take place through primary processes, immediate drive satisfaction, but sublimation involves secondary processes, words, symbols, social artifacts, maybe some paintbrush and a canvas. Sublimation then takes us out of our archaic, pre-Oedipal space and into a social world. It can allow for a playful transformation of our desire, as well as a way to work through the resistances that lead to repression and symptom formation. So basically, sublimation is, if we can't get what we want, we find something that is almost as good. It may be socially acceptable, but can be really exciting, you know? When you get a journal article published and you get a new study out there, when you've made a discovery, that's exciting, right? That's sublimation. You don't just do it for science's sake, okay, right? We also do it because it really feels good. It's satisfying. It's transformative. I venture that people who gravitate to a more progressive and forward politics are open to playing with identity and open to this kind of project. They are open to working through the loss of the thing, and not by trying to find the thing itself, but by elevating some objects in one's midst to the dignity of the thing. This is a Lacanian kind of formula. You know, I can't go back to mama, but maybe that garden I'm creating kind of evokes mama. And it's, you know, awesome. Instead of needing to return to the first months of that life that were enchanted, they might be able to find through sublimation ways through language and other secondary symbolic processes, ways to re-enchant the world. Finally, there's a term that's kind of fun that Lacan introduces, symptome. So symptome is, well, I'll just read a little bit. So this is a term that Lacan coins to signify how through sublimation the subject might elucidate the ineffable real of the symptom, right? So the symptom, okay, let's say the symptom of white supremacy, or the symptom of a kind of politics of, you know, we, the Greeks, are the best, or whatever that is. You find that's maybe your symptom, is that you kind of have a little bit too much thing about your people, right? You say, and you realize, like, okay, that's kind of my thing. Now I'm going to play with it. I see the shape of my symptom. So, as Dylan Evans puts it, whereas Lacan had seen the symptom in the 1950s as a message to be deciphered and dissolved, the symptoms designates a signifying formulation beyond analysis, a kernel of enjoyment immune to the efficacy of the symbolic. So I noted above that symptoms can provide unconscious relief and pleasure, but they can also get in the way of living. Lacan's enigmatic notion of symptoms suggests that through much analysis and sublimation, one might get to the essence of the symptom without all the suffering. You know, symptoms are ways to get what you want indirectly, right? But if you can play with it, it's another way, again, to sublimate. One might come to identify and live with one's own quirky, singular kind of desiring, what one really wants without having to disguise the desire, instead of, say, obsessively hand-washing to unconsciously compensate for something. One might become comfortable with, maybe even amused by, one's murderous desires without having a compulsion to act on it. As Evans puts it, identifying with a symptom can allow the subject to live, but by providing him or her with a unique organization of his or her jouissance. The individual singularity largely emanates from how central the symptom is to his being. This same phenomenon can show up in large group identities, where what it is to be a particular kind of people follows the shape and singularity of its approach to the real, then this is how I think interventions can change. So, I was talking with some colleagues yesterday about how maybe, you can take your own identity and play with it, create art out of it. And so you're kind of poking fun and transforming who your people are in a way that opens up things. So this mode of playing with identity instead of taking it too seriously can be a way, carried out through creativity, through play, through satire. It is, I'm going to just say a few words here just to finish, really, because I should stop. But it's really a way to think about moving into more of a depressive position when one is trying to, instead of denying the complexity of other people, that mama is both there sometimes and not, the bad breast and the good breast, that complex people, it's like kind of playing with it, reveling in it. The neighbor that I thought was just this bigoted person, awful because they have a different political persuasion, I realized that they share something I like. There's something redeemable about them. I mean, that kind of complexity is the function of the depressive position, and just what we're talking about here. It comes what Teresa was talking about, gratitude. It's like realizing, I had these neighbors who were like Republican Reagan peaceful supporters, I think. And I realized that they had values that I really liked. I didn't have them. Loyalty, stay with your team till the end. I thought, that's kind of a cool value. I didn't know, it's not. But, kind of just beginning to appreciate the complexity and all. I think what Paul will talk about tomorrow about that cultivating a democratic self is very much in line with what I'm talking about here. So again, thank you all. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for staying with me through the day. And stay here and put some hard questions or insights or anything you want. Okay, thank you.